Hello and welcome to the breakdown on Latte Firm. Stop, collaborate and listen because Declan Rice is going to be a gunner. Welcome to the show. What a great show we've got tonight. And I am so delighted to have George back on the firm. George, welcome back. How are you?
I'm excellent, mate. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I hope the internet connection is not letting us down. I think there's a bit of a lag my side, but forgive me for that. Now, normally, George, when we do these breakdowns, we always have a person of the opposition sort of club, the club that we tend to buy the player from, someone who's watched the player, in front of their own sort of eyes, live in a stadium. But this time we've gone for you. But there's a little story behind this, right? So tell me about your long-term affection for Declan Rice.
I have been a longtime fan, sometimes in the shadows, sometimes fairly publicly, from I probably say since 2020, since my first time on Twitter, really. And I've been asking for this signing for many years. We've been attempting to manifest it. I've been called every name under the sun, and we are finally here. And I'll be honest, as probably one of the biggest fanboys of Declan Rice, I still can't quite believe it. I still can't quite believe the the kind of the ramifications of it, both culturally and just footballistically. What we've done to get this over the line is something that I just can't stop smiling from, and I can't wait to get into it because I want to share kind of my love for the player with everybody else, and I think everybody else is excited, just in general about the idea of Declan Rice coming in, even if you're not 100% sold on everything he can do. I think what Arsenal have done broadly is making everybody smile ear to ear.
You're absolutely right. Let's just sort of cast our minds back. This was supposed to be a summer of excitement for Arsenal fans. We finished second after finishing fifth, after finishing eighth, and it's a real opportunity for Arsenal to go and make a statement, as Arasilki says in the chat. Make a statement, go big, and go hard for next season, where we can really genuinely compete with Manchester City, treble-winning Manchester City, might I add. And in the last few days, different names have been linked with the club. And of course, there's various breakdowns on the YouTube channel feed at Latte Firm if you want to find out about any of the other players. But Declan Rice is a name that just hasn't gone away. And yesterday, £105 million, the fee that's been agreed for Declan Rice, West Ham captain, England midfielder Declan Rice, and it's Arsenal. So listen, subject to an almighty collapse in the next couple of days, this is going to go through and this is going to be big for Arsenal. So hopefully we're going to find out more about Declan Rice. And George, I'm really intrigued to hear your thoughts about him. I know you're a long-standing aficionado of the player. I'm sure you're going to go into his strengths, his weaknesses, his playing styles. If you're watching live, please do drop a like on the video. Please drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you to everybody who's been watching, 20,000 plus subscribers now, which is unbelievable. And please do get involved in the comments. Let me know if Declan Rice is the sort of player that you want to see at Arsenal. What a stupid question, but there we are. Right, let's bring up the slides as we normally do, George. Some basic profile overview, and I'll go through this as I normally do. What do we know about Declan? Well, we know that he's 24 years of age, and even at 24, he is a young man. He's a dad. He's got a son. He's 6'2", very sort of physically robust, very intimidating, imposing, with that big aura about him. And he's currently playing for West Ham United. He is an England international with more than 40 caps to his name, though he, of course, has Irish blood in his family, and he did make some appearances for the Republic of Ireland. Predominantly right-footed as a player and loves to play central midfield, either as a defensive enforcer or in a slightly more advanced central midfield position, although he did start off his career at centre-back. This season in the Premier League, he started 36 games, came off the bench on one and missed one game. In terms of goals and assists, which is obviously first metric that everybody wants to know, 4 goals this current season just gone and 2 assists. Duels won, 58% of his duels he's winning, very comparable to midfielders at Arsenal. Passing accuracy of 88%. And in terms of discipline, he's never actually been sent off in his entire Premier League career. And he had 5 yellow cards last season. That bodes well for a team that's not had any sendings off for the first time in a season after a very long spell. His current contract at West Ham expires at the end of June 24, though the +1 in brackets means that they have the option to extend. So any chance or any talk of him nabbing a move to Arsenal on a free next summer would really not have been in question. In terms of his upbringing, he was actually at the Chelsea Academy along with Mason Mount, who of course is linked with a move to Manchester United, or I think is on the verge of signing for Manchester United. Was at the Academy from 7 years of age, was then released by Chelsea. He joined the West Ham Academy at 14 years of age. and at 16 went straight into the under 23s at West Ham. And ever since then, he's kind of burst onto the scene, making his senior debut in 2017. He's played over 200 games for West Ham in that time. And interestingly, George, he was named runner-up as Hammer of the Year in his first season. He was shortlisted for PFA Young Player of the Year in his second season. And then he went on to win Hammer of the Year in 3 seasons, 1920, 21-22, and the season that's just gone, of course. He is son to 2 Irish parents, both of whom have obviously Irish parents themselves. They were born in the city of Cork in Ireland, hence the Republic of Ireland link. But of course, now he's 200 games plus, 40 games plus for England, 200 games plus for West Ham, and he's on the verge of signing for Arsenal. Now, George, opening question. Why would Arsenal be interested in a player like Declan Rice? What does he bring to this Arsenal team?
I mean, there's a lot that you could talk about football wise, but I'll start just really culturally in terms of what he can bring on a leadership perspective. And when we're trying to look at kind of what this Arsenal team needs from an experience standpoint, but also in terms of replacing Granit Xhaka, in terms of how we can try to make sure that this team takes the next step forward culturally. Declan Rice is super important in terms of what West Ham have kind of done in a leadership perspective, both on and off the pitch, in terms of making sure that they keep up fundamentals, non-negotiables of the team. He's been kind of a character setting for not just West Ham in a first team sense, but even throughout the academy. When you look at kind of Declan Rice's story, he kind of shares something that a lot of our targets actually share, which is what I think Mikel loves, which is going through some strife, going through some difficulty. Being released by kind of your boyhood club is not something that you love to see, but to then take that next step forward and kind of making sure that you don't let it derail or define your career is something, a mental strength that I love in Declan Rice's game. And I think it translates, by the way, into his on the field play, where he just has this kind of never give up kind of attitude. In terms of what he'll bring footballistically, it's quite incredible in terms of a defensive point of view. And this is not shocking analysis, but I think for me, one of the best defensive midfielders in the game at doing what he does in terms of blocking, interception. But also, how does he make the interception kind of an art? Because it's one thing just to say that he's excellent at interception and he's got great transition control, but how does he do it? And so I think he's just incredibly intelligent, both in his scanning. If you noticed, every single time he's constantly got his head on a swivel, not just in possession, but out of possession in particular. And he's got a picture in his mind of where to be before he needs to be there. There was a recent interview, I think, with Kieran Trippier and Rio Ferdinand, where he kind of mentions this idea that Declan has this picture off the ball. And he kind of reminds me very similar when I read or watched rather the documentary, of Michael Jordan and kind of that Detroit Pistons teams. When you start looking at some of the kind of the rebounding of that team, particularly with our favorite colorful character there, he kind of talked about how you would analyze patterns of rebounds, and Declan Rice kind of does that with interceptions. He analyzes the opposition's kind of intent in terms of positioning, and then he kind of adjusts whether or not he's kind of the hunter, I like to call it, which is where you see him typically kind of hunt down kind of individual players, or there are times where he will kind of be very meticulous in terms of making sure that he's not attacking any space until the player's touch is a little bit out of reach. He then chooses to kind of focus in, and that kind of controlled aggression is just absolutely immense. And that reading of the game, analyzing dribbling patterns, has a huge positional discipline. And so when you start to try to kind of project that forward, how can we work on this stuff on the ball? Especially when I think a lot of the major concerns of Declan, and we'll get into some of the weaknesses a little bit later, but a lot of the concerns are, how does he fit in a positional system? Well, a lot of this football brain, this scanning, this idea of when to hold, when to step off the ball are the exact traits that you would ask on the ball, particularly with an anchor in terms of controlling possession and having a little bit of pausa in your play, i.e., when to kind of speed up the play, when to decelerate, when to accelerate it. Other variable traits that we can just get into, he is just a person that you can't move. He moves people with the ball. It's kind of freakish in terms of his frame, how he has such tight control and ball manipulation while he's running, and he's excellent in tight spaces. Um, I think the ball striking has to be said. His passing repertoire is quite immense. When you first mentioned him coming into the West Ham team as a first teamer, one of the primary things he did was as a center back. And what he learned in that kind of role was kind of the long passing range technique. He strikes through the ball really firm. It meets kind of his markers with precision. It's not floated, it's not chipped. And, I think that's phenomenal when you're starting to look at how do we isolate play and switch quickly. One of the key core principles of Mikel Arteta is drawing in a press and then switching it to the ball side. And so I think he will add a level of kind of quality in those spaces, kind of the Virgil van Dijk crossfield ball to Salah that Mikel Arteta loves to kind of quote. Declan has that in his locker, in addition to some of the really fun ball carrying and ball striking he has, which make him a goal threat, which we've seen kind of this past season in terms of having an ability to carry the ball from your own 18-yard box to the other 18-yard box. How many midfielders have that ability? And it's very few. I'm looking at your Vieiras, your Yaya Toures, and of course, I mentioned Yaya Toure very specifically, a specific kind of inspiration for him in past interviews. But you're getting a very multifaceted player, somebody that I don't think is limited to a particular position, which is beneficial towards us. I think what you're getting is a player that has a lot of growth and more importantly is able to grow. I think he's a willing learner. I think he's somebody that has come in and has elevated his game in different areas and has taken a level of maturity in his game that I really appreciate. He's starting to understand tempo a lot more, and he's kind of showing that responsibility about when to put out fires. I've always felt that Declan, from a young age, was somebody that had immense physical potential, but at times had a bit of the Granit Xhaka about him, where he would just run to fires and he would try to put everything out as much as he could without holding that same kind of positional discipline. So when I'm seeing his game develop, especially last season, I'm seeing him take on a lot more responsibility. He's going to orchestrate the buildup. He's constantly pointing, and I think he will thrive having teammates that he trusts. I think a lot of what Declan has been unable to show in possession is a direct correlation to kind of the lack of quality that surrounds him. So I'm excited for him to learn, to grow, but there's just so many traits that you could isolate with Declan and say, wow.
What an answer. It's just a quick question as to why we think we should sign Declan Rice, and off the bat, you can see the passion oozing off your face. I mean, look, make no mistake, he is one of England's best midfielders, one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. And in terms of profile, this age, this experience, his leadership quality that you talk about, of course, Granit Xhaka hasn't left Arsenal yet, but if he does, there will be a big leader leaving the dressing room. And to go out to a London club and to nab a captain and to fend off a rival like Manchester City, who could have blown us out of the water with all sorts of money, and they are the treble winning team, 5 Premier League titles in 6 years. Yeah, that would have been the easy choice for Declan Rice. He could have gone to Manchester City easily, commanded a starting spot, won loads and loads of trophies. But the fact that he's interested in joining Arteta's project at Arsenal, the fact that he wants to stay in London, speaks volumes about the boy. What I've brought up while you were talking, George, is the radar, courtesy the excellent Canon Stats. Anybody tuning in for the first time, not familiar with this, it breaks down a player's game into 3 areas: the defensive side, which is the red maroony bit; the attacking side, which is the dark blue bit, so sort of goals, open shot goals, non-penalty XG, etc., and what a player does in possession, which is the grey bit. And it compares them in terms of percentile to players in Europe's top 5 leagues. So this is how Declan Rice ranks against fellow midfielders. And immediately, George, my attention is brought to the defensive side of his game. And of course, he started out as a centre-back, was very much the defensive enforcer, has been very much the defensive enforcer at West Ham. And look at what he's doing in terms of ball recoveries. Look at what he's doing in terms of tackles and tackles won. The guy's phenomenal. As defensive midfielders go, and this is where Thomas Partey could potentially have competition at maybe at the number 6 sort of position. What a player we've got in our hands from a defensive side.
And that's so important from a Mikel Arteta standpoint when you analyze our off the ball press. I'm sure one of the best things that I've looked at from this past season, by the way, and I've often quoted as our MVP, has been that press. And I think when you're looking at Declan Rice's strengths, and it's why I said for me, the best defensive midfielder in the world, because this is his particular superpower. He will not lose races. And he is somebody that will be able to kind of stick with people and allow you to commit more bodies forward. Ultimately, this level of transition control is so elite that he's somebody that indirectly affects goals. So even though we're not just talking about his ball striking or specific traits that Declan himself provides, he allows a platform for your best players in Martinelli and Saka to get closer to goal more frequently as possible without the burden of kind of leaving defensive gaps and keeping that central compactness. Something that I think that we did struggle with at times from January onward, I would say. I think the first half of the season showed a very good level of compactness between our lines, but for what not for either through injury or through us missing certain players elsewhere, we were unlucky, but I still felt that the second half of the season left us a little bit more open than I would have liked. Declan almost himself single-handedly solves that. He's done that for West Ham on his own. But I think the biggest thing that I'm really excited about is what he gives our forward players as a platform and kind of what allows them maybe to be a little bit more creative. I felt sometimes that, the Martinelli, Jesus, Saka, they've been burdened in terms of making sure that some of the gaps are filled off the ball. And I do feel that having a secure presence in a Declan Rice and a Thomas Partey even partnership potential, because a lot of people look at it as like for like switching. I'm kind of sitting here thinking, what does that pivot offer you? I get very excited when I start to see the combinations of the vertical passing from a Thomas Partey without losing that defensive capability with a Declan Rice. And I do think that even people as close as William Saliba, who's in behind leading the kind of the progression through the lines, will have a lot more flexibility in maybe carrying the ball into midfield, something we didn't quite see, last season, but something we absolutely could see. And one thing with Declan, he's this new prototype six where I feel that they're a more mobile version of a lot of the sixes that we've seen from the past. He's a different six to kind of Rodri if we talk about kind of anchoring the two and what are the differences. Declan is a carry first player, and a lot of times that's meant people are afraid. Does that mean he can't receive off center backs? I think quite the contrary. We're looking towards a new type of six now that's a little bit more mobile, that must be more mobile in order to kind of attribute for more people being committed forward. I think the idea of six channels, I think the idea of committing more offensive players forward is something Mikel is salivating at the thought at. And Declan's defensive numbers, you can see them right there, give you the perfect platform to feel comfortable doing that.
They do indeed. We're going to talk about his offensive game shortly, but the stats not particularly impressive in terms of goals and non-penalty XG and open play sort of expected assist, but perhaps more reflective of the system that he plays in. West Ham not too dominant; they don't control games. Of course, they've had a tough season in the Premier League. He did, however, complete more than twice as many passes than any of his teammates in the team, and of course, West Ham have been largely dysfunctional. Of course, they had triumph in Europe. It's what he's doing on the ball that's really impressive, George. And you just talked about that sort of, vertical passing and that sort of progressive play. Look at his contribution in terms of expected goal build up, his passing efficiency, passes into the final third ranks really highly. You talk about him progressive carries. I mean, he gallops like a horse with the ball at his feet. He covers so much ground. We'll look at his heat map in just a second. But is this particularly one of the key features of Declan's game, the way that he can progress the ball and carry the ball, and how might that be, used in the Arsenal lineup?
Yeah, I really think that the technical ability of Declan Rice has had a very large false narrative, let's say on Twitter and abroad in terms of some of the analysis. I think he doesn't get enough praise for his actual technical quality. I think one of the things that stand out for me is Declan Rice has a phenomenal ability in terms of receiving the ball to try to set it in a progressive way. So what do I mean by that? In terms of his mind, he's always two steps ahead and he's looking to progress play as efficiently as possible. And he's not somebody that will force the issue, which I do like. I think there's a certain tempered, recycled nature to him, which I find very exciting. But when you combine it kind of with that close control in tight spaces that he has, that's the freaky part. You're looking at what a 6'2" kind of tank, really. They're not supposed to move like this. And I find that he has a phenomenal step count. So, what we call kind of just in coaching circles, which is the speed with which he can accelerate and decelerate with the ball, is actually quite scary. He's got a phenomenal mastery of that. And I think that's what allows him to really be a multifaceted progressor, not just in a carrying sense, but when you start to look at his passing ability, he's got a phenomenal eye for space. It's what he does to really make the interceptions an art, but it kind of makes him an excellent in possession dictator. Because when you look at it, he knows which spaces kind of defensive midfielders, but defenders would prefer to go to. And I find that his football brain in recognizing those gaps is phenomenal. Does he have the same cuteness in tight spaces 100% of the time? That's something he can improve on for sure. But for me, he's got the picture in his head. He's got an idea of what he needs to do. And the one thing that I'm probably a little bit more surprised at is in terms of his goal scoring potential. That's purely to do with West Ham's ability to have a much deeper line than Arsenal's. I think if you put him in spaces that are higher up the pitch, we've seen how composed he is. And again, I always say having a player that can carry it from your 18-yard box to the opposite 18-yard box is a very scary player. And that's not something that's common. Only, your kind of your Yaya Toures, your Vieiras are able to do that and keep almost the same pace, but keep the moment about when to make a final action. That for me, that understanding of the game is something that puts Declan a little bit far ahead. And you know what? Yeah, I think that his ball striking mean that he could actually maybe be a little bit better in crossing as well. That's something that I don't think really West Ham ask of him. Cresswell down that side is really somebody that takes over that control. But if I'm looking from an Arsenal perspective and I'm looking at some of the positions that, Granit Xhaka has taken up in terms of operating wide in or changing, with our left wing, I think that Declan could have a lot better, technique in some of his crossing and more consistent. But, in terms of the ball striking, that's the one side that I love. I think he's got a very short back lift, which makes it very exciting for me when I'm trying to predict future goals. And look, we've all seen the Europa League runs where he carries it and he finishes it with aplomb. I think that he is a player that's got high goal scoring potential. I don't see it as his final form, but I certainly feel that when he's put in those positions, he won't look lost. If anything, he'll thrive.
I think so too. I mean, everything you're saying is so mouthwatering, George, and you're getting a lot of love in the chat. But we must move on through the slides. And the next one that I've brought up is the heat map comparisons. These heat maps, courtesy of sofascore.com. The first one is of Declan Rice. The next two are of Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, all in last season's Premier League. And what strikes out to me, of course, Declan Rice likes to play that sort of left-sided role. He likes to play that, which is why a lot of people have talked about that sort of left-sided eight coming in for Granit Xhaka. He's covering a lot of ground generally, and that to me indicates that he's a bit of an endurance athlete. We know he's ever present. We know he's capable of playing 40, 50 games a season, but the guy is really reliable. And I think for all of Granit Xhaka's flaws and for all of the criticism that Granit Xhaka has taken, unfairly in my opinion, the
Mhm.
one thing that we always had in Granit was that ever presence, that reliability. We knew that he would be fit. It doesn't matter, come rain or shine, the guy would be there ready to play for Arsenal. And in someone like Thomas Partey, who would play the other central midfield role, he's not been ever present. He has gone missing in big games and for spells in seasons. And so I think in Declan Rice, he's as sure a bet as you can have in someone coming in, hitting the ground running, acclimatized to the Premier League, familiar with the intensity of our game, and will be, because every player is a gamble, right, George? But we know that this guy has done it and he's done it for years and physically and the way that he covers ground. I'm so excited by this. But tell us what you see in terms of similarities to Thomas Partey. You talked about coming in for Granit Xhaka, and of course, Granit Xhaka's got amongst the goals last season. Where do you expect him to play? Central midfield, maybe number six alongside Granit, advanced in that sort of left eight position. What are your thoughts?
I think that he is a proper 6'8", not to keep on the fence, but he can do both roles. And by the way, we shouldn't pigeonhole him to a role. That's one thing I will say. I think that for me, I've always envisioned him as a proper anchor that you build your team around. I see him in that proverbial six role, let's say. But you see here, even in his heat map, he's not afraid to get in the final third. He's not afraid to kind of operate in higher spaces. And by the way, I don't think that just because you may operate as a current anchor, that the future anchors are going to stay and be these water carriers of the past that basically just recycle the ball, pass it off. I think they're going to be more involved, and I think they're going to be asked to step up a little bit more. When I look at Declan Rice, and you mentioned the availability, not to like take it away from our other recruits, but by the way, Kai Havertz, Urian Timber, other performed signings, they share that availability kind of strength as well as a three. I think that's a clear motive in the recruitment team where we have been burnt by injuries. And let's have it right. I think in the last 2 to 3 seasons, injuries have derailed our objective. Whether or not you believe that maybe, the Premier League was the actual goal at the start of the season is neither here nor there. Once we got to a position where we were competing, unfortunately, injuries have stopped us from being able to kind of play in a particular way. And And I think Declan solves that, on his own. But one thing that I love is he carries this kind of flexibility and this positional freedom. So for me, in a sense, I feel as though that him operating at the base of midfield is something that's going to be kind of the primary target from Mikel. But if there are games that we can kind of combine Thomas Partey together with him, we might transfer roles. We might see, Declan move up, Partey sit. And as a defensive pivot, I actually think that's more likely what's going to happen, where you're going to have this paired pivot in a 3-2. And I think the ball side ball carrier will go high, and then the opposite side will cover deep. And it'll be this kind of partnership. It won't be just one way or the other. And, I'll just end on this. Everybody remembers the Everton Zinchenko goal, where even nominally as a left back, he switches off to the right, half space, and he slips in Saka for a beautifully worked kind of through ball. But, again, it just shows you that, that positional freedom, it exists within our system. And that's one thing that I do think is different from Declan and that we will see. So, not to sit on the fence, I think he'll be an anchor, but that doesn't mean he'll stay at the back.
I think I completely agree with you, and lots of comments in the chat comparing him to one of his idols, Yaya Toure. But of course, Patrick Vieira. Arsenal fans over the years have always said, are we going to replace Vieira? Is he finally the next Vieira? Declan Rice is probably as close as you're going to get to someone like that. But let's move on.
Mm.
Let's talk about defending, and these again, courtesy of the excellent Canon stats. And just in case you're tuning in for the first time and you've not seen these swarms before, the swarms in the middle compare Declan Rice, who is that red dot, to Europe's top 5 leagues of players. So the further he is to the right, the better he is in that sort of trait. The left graphic that you can see is basically every interception that Declan has made. Those are the diamonds. Every tackle that Declan made last season, those are the squares. And every foul he committed, those are the red crosses, etc., etc. Let's start with that. And immediately, George, I can see that Declan Rice is very comfortable at making interceptions, making tackles, and look at those ball recoveries. 322 ball recoveries last season, all over the pitch. He is a aggressive, front-footed enforcer. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, and he's one of the finest in the league. I think he and Rodri are probably leading the way in terms of stats. Tell us about his defensive game.
It's a superpower, right? Like, you can't look at Declan Rice and then not talk about those ball recoveries, but the transition control. That's fundamentally what it comes down to in terms of what you might be seeing here in terms of his total defensive actions. We all know he's a mover. We all know he's got phenomenal technique. What I love is how varied his tackling technique is. I don't think he relies on a particular way to stop people. I think he's perfectly happy defending in space. I think that's going to be phenomenal for us in a high line. When you start to look at how busy he is here on the graph on the left, I think that's a consequence of West Ham. Imagine what you're seeing in the defensive third in the opposition's defensive third. I think that's how high we're going to be pushing him. And it just makes me kind of almost salivate, respectively, at the idea that we've got, somebody that we can leave on his own with Gabriel, Saliba, defending these large spaces and essentially allowing us to just commit more bodies forward. And it makes me think he alone is going to give everybody space and time. He's somebody that you look at for security. He's somebody that doesn't shy away from the challenge, not just in the challenge and the tackle, but I mean, even in game states that maybe go against us. One thing that I probably want to highlight is he's really going to help us control negative game state atmospheres. So I'm looking at Anfield. I'm looking at some of these other environments that force us to maybe go a little bit more transition based. I feel a lot more comfortable having the transition monster and legend that is Declan Rice in that team to kind of solve that. And we can no longer blame, let's say, the crowd giving a lift or a change in game state. He operates at one pace and he's consistent at it and he's among the best at it. So this
I'm
is
so glad you mentioned that, George, because as much as Declan Rice strengthens our team and will be used as a team that will blow most teams away, the versatility that he gives us now going into those big games, particularly in Europe, away at the Etihad, away at Old Trafford, away at Anfield, the London derbies. All of a sudden, you've got someone who's so physically robust and so good at defending, and he can play a variety of roles in that centre, that you're just so much stronger straight off the bat. And
yeah.
I'm really looking forward to how Mikel uses him in different sort of scenarios and different setups against different levels of opposition.
And we don't even have to go as far as that, mate. Like, what about Sporting? Like, it would have lovely to have, like, and I know I mean it a little bit facetiously, but just when the team is down, Declan rises. And I think that's evident. He is somebody that's gonna have his strengths, but I just think he is the type of character that, is in the Ramsdale mold that, people give him stick, he wants to perform better. And I think for me, having somebody who's experienced do that is just something that, this team has lacked for so long. And of course, yeah, the defensive ability here at its core, just to loop it back, it's sustained pressure, right? If you've got somebody that's able to have such a great transition control like Declan, you're able to keep the ball in the final third. And that's ultimately what we want to do.
Correct. And in terms of keeping the ball in the final third, I've just brought up Declan Rice's passing. And again, the Swarm chart's exactly the same, ranking him against midfielders in Europe's top 5 leagues. But look at the graphic on the left-hand side again, courtesy of the excellent Canon stats. This is a graphic that shows every pass he's completed, so that 87% completion rate, every progressive pass, 117 progressive passes in the Premier League last season, and key passes, creating chances. And immediately, I mean, his passing volume, he is a high volume passer. Like, he likes to make progressive passes on the whole, and he's really high up in terms of final third entry passes, and that's surprising given how deep he's played for Manchester. Oh my God, what a slip that was!
Freudian slip.
Yeah, has how deep he's played for West Ham. I mean, we've touched upon his passing ability, but again, as a bit of a driver in that midfield for Arsenal, I'm really looking forward to the impact he's going to have on the way that we play.
Absolutely, and I mean, you're right to kinda highlight the final third entry passes because I don't think he gets enough credit for that. People look at him as this carrier, which they should. He's a tank. He's excellent at carrying the ball, but guys, he has a phenomenal football brain for spatial awareness, and, you don't get that without recognizing the space where to go, and by the way, like, he is kind of West Ham's orchestrator, both in a build-up sense, in a progression sense, and yes, unfortunately, even finishing chances, he has all of those responsibilities. And I think that's made him a better player in terms of maturity. One thing that I'll probably highlight just on the graph that you may not see within the numbers is just have a look at kind of those blue progressive passes in open play. There's quite a bit that is working at switching play here. That's what I'm so excited about because I feel as though a key part of kind of Arteta's non-negotiables is making sure that we isolate people or in a pod in one particular area of the pitch before quickly switching to the underloaded side, which is just a technical term for the free man, which is typically on the opposite side. Once you commit bodies forward with the kind of the ball carrying dribbler like Declan does, he draws people out of their defensive shape. And then he has the technical ability to slip in either through a cross or through a slipped in ball in behind kind of the center back and full back. And I think that's what I'm really excited about because I find that these dribbling types that have that footballing brain to know when to release is something that we've actually struggled with efficiency wise in the final third that I actually think Declan will help with. I think that there are times last season that, look, we were excellent in terms of scoring goals, but there were times that we weren't as clinical in our final action, let's say, and we didn't kill games off as soon as we could have. I do think that Declan really helps in an offensive sense in terms of making sure we convert those final third half chances into really good 1v1 chances.
Building on his sort of ball carrying ability, his carries is probably the most exciting thing about him, George, in my personal opinion. And I think for the longest time we had Granit Xhaka in that left 8 role. He's played in central midfield. He's not that much of a carrier. He likes to get the ball. He likes to play it out quickly. Thomas Partey anchored in front of that back four. He does go on those sort of buccaneering runs, but not all the time. Erdegaard, technically just such a wonderful player, always looking for that pass and that through ball. Declan Rice, and again, sort of shades of Vieira, because Vieira used to do it. He used to sort of gallop with the ball, box to box. This is a guy that's going to take the ball, want to own the ball, and want to move it up the pitch and drive with such ferocity and aggression. This is probably the standout thing for me. The way that he loves carrying it. He's not a dribbler. Doesn't want to dribble past players. He's very rarely going to take on players with tricks and skills 1v1. But in terms of just, covering grass, moving the ball forward, getting us closer to the opposition goal, this is going to be insane.
It's like I've said kind of earlier in the video, it is very rare that you've got a player that has the ability, footballing ability, to take it from his own 18-yard box to the opposition's 18-yard box. That's no mean feat. And he is somebody that transitions the thirds, not just operates in a third, but actually physically transitions the thirds. And what do I mean by that? He is somebody that will take it from his own defensive third into the final third alone. If he doesn't see an option, if he doesn't get flustered, he is perfectly fine entering the fire and exiting it. And it's very exciting. Like you said, I think this is one of his superpowers. And I'll just make note, for me, it's those kind of the tight feet that he's got. It's phenomenal. His close control is incredible on the dribble, and you would think these type of players are more push and run dribblers. He's not. He's got this kind of close control that a winger does on the dribble, that isn't reliant on space. A lot of times with these central midfielders, what you do get, at least people in his frame and his size, is somebody that is a push and run, somebody that will go into the space, and then he doesn't know what to do when things get congested. That's not him. He almost thrives on it, and he is able to accelerate, decelerate on a dime. So I just think that carrying wise, it's going to be so important for us to kind of get out of difficult situations and pressing situations. When I look at Brighton, I look at City, and I look at how people pressed us at times, and we were unable to necessarily find the open man. Declan will force it, and sometimes you need that verticality. So yeah, I really enjoy what he can do carrying wise, and I get excited for it. I can't not. It's a superpower.
It really is. Listen, this whole review has been phenomenal and everything's been so positive. We have to talk about areas where maybe he's not had the chance to excel or things that we think he might need to sort of work on. And I think finishing and scoring goals is something that he's not really had the chance to do. I mean, these again courtesy of the excellent Canon stats. 4 goals in the season gone by, 2 assists, 2 goals inside the box. There you can see the yellow dots on the shot map. 2 goals from outside the box. Has a shot accuracy of 1 in 3. He's not really had the chance in his career so far because of the deep role that he's played, because of the way maybe West Ham play, George. But he's not had that chance to kind of make those darting runs into the box like Granit Xhaka has, for example, last season. So that's going to be really interesting to see how he kind of maybe adapts to that. And I wonder if he's got it in his locker to go out and get 10, 12 maybe goals from midfield. And you look at assists, again, sort of 2 assists in the league last season. You can see that in the bottom sort of graphic there, the key passes that he's making, that 1 assist from outside the box. Um, is this an area that you think you're sort of intrigued by? Because I don't really want to say he's not good at it because he's not really had a chance to do it at West Ham.
Yeah, I think it's very harsh to say he's not good for that exact reason. He hasn't been put in positions that allow him to do so. Because remember, if Declan loses the ball, who's protecting Declan? So that's kind of the case with West Ham, unfortunately. But I want to draw everybody's attention just really quickly to that one passage of play that we've kept trying to go on repeat from set pieces this past season with Thomas Partey. That first time shot at the edge of the box. And then I want to jog everyone's memory. Ironically, Declan's first goal, do you remember that it was against us? And it was in that
Yeah.
exact position, in fact. And I just see him being able to replicate because he's got the technique, he's got the wrap on the ball, he's got the power, he's got phenomenal ball striking, a short back lift. I do think that he's got a high potential for scoring, but in particular offset pieces. I think that kind of first time hit, that Thomas Partey does, is something that Declan could easily replicate. But I'm going to go one step further. I even think in possession he can do a little bit more off the ball. So we've talked a lot about his on the ball cuteness in tight spaces. One thing I think he does need to develop is a little bit more of the Granit Xhaka spatial runs. So what Granit Xhaka was brilliant at this last season was making sure to kind of invade the box and stretch center backs and fullbacks. I think he can do that, but he doesn't show it. And I think it is an area of improvement where I feel in an attacking sense, if we're going to maximize his ability there, he's going to have a little bit more responsibility in making sure to stretch fullbacks and center backs and doing it via runs and dummy runs. And it's just not something that he's been asked to do. Again, he's got the fitness, he's got the power to do it. So it's not like I'm questioning, does he have the ability? But he doesn't have, I'd say, that maybe final third brain to do it off the ball. He is very ball centric. Now, that's a consequence of his environment, sure, but it is a little bit of, I'd say, a current weakness that, Mikel would definitely want to work on that, trust your teammates and make sure that you're making some of those unselfish runs off the ball, which I think he can do, but he just doesn't quite show yet.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the other thing that bodes well is his height. You know, we talked about him being a tall player, 6'2". It's
Aerial
interesting that
ability.
Mikel, yeah, but it's also interesting that Mikel's gone for Kai Havertz. You know, he's another 6'3" player, and I think outside of our back five, Granit Xhaka is the tallest outfield player at 6 foot, 6'1". So for us to be going out and adding that sort of aerial dynamism, I guess, in Kai Havertz, who's a great link-up player, and there's obviously a breakdown on the channel on him. But Declan, just to add a bit more aerial presence in midfield, maybe from set pieces, both defensively and offensively, I think is a good thing. I think there's one criticism of Declan Rice for me, George, and of course I've not watched him as many times as you have, and I certainly don't know much about about him than you do. But like there are moments where he can be a little bit clumsy in possession, and what I mean by that is I kind of want to see how he develops this, but like Arsenal over the years have had lots of players where we can play that one touch transition, one touch build play. And, you know, Cazorla, Wilshere, Cesc, Ramsey, Party, we see Xhaka. We've seen these players that just, one touch, two touch, ball out of their feet, progress the ball up the pitch really quick. We've seen so many moves like that, right? Arsenal
Mm.
classic goals, the Wenger classic. And it will be interesting to see how Declan adapts to that because I think he's a player who likes to have time on the ball. I think he likes to try and dictate it from deep from West Ham. You know, he always kind of like every time you see him, he's always got the ball at his feet. So I just wonder how he's going to sort of adapt to that. And I think the big challenge for him is going to be playing with better players will obviously elevate his game, but how will he feel from being hammer of the year 3 times in 4 years, from being the big fish in a respectfully small pond to all of a sudden being a good player in a top team? And will the pressure get to him? I know he's just won the Europa Super Conference with West Ham. Fabulous achievement. Great achievement. But he's got to take that next step up now. So, psychologically, I wonder how he's going to impact it. Do you have any sort of not weak, well, yeah, weak points? Do you have anything that you want to see him do more of next season in closing?
Yeah, no, I do. I think adventure in the first phase is something I would like him to at times learn a little bit better. He does have a tendency to recycle safely, and I think part of that is fear of his teammates, but also Declan needs to take some responsibility there. Like I think his kind of body orientation receiving can look a little stiff. It can. I think that's why a lot of people kind of negate some of his in possession qualities. So I do think that, his gait receiving is just something that he can iron out a little bit. And guess what? Mikel has done that with Gabriel, our center back, um, brilliantly. And I think I see a little bit of a transition there. And it all starts there. Once he's able to do that and he's got a little bit more fluidity in the way that he can turn on the half turn, then that opens up the brilliant forward passing that we know he has. If you look in terms of his progressive final passing, the pass is not the problem. For me, it's the body position. And that's mostly what the issue is when you're building up in those phases. So I worry about that. And I think that, we'll see a little bit more development there from Mikel. When you talk about his clumsiness in possession, I think that kind of relates a little bit more to his body orientation for me. I just think sometimes it's wrong because when he's running and he's carrying the ball, the manipulation is excellent. Like it's brilliant. And there's almost times that you're frustrated. I know you have more technical ability. You shouldn't lose it there, kind of thing. And so I believe with a little bit more. Part of the thing of him moving to Arsenal, by the way, I think is becoming that player of the year, not just in West Ham, but at Arsenal. Like he is that kind of person. He wants the spotlight. He wants, that kind of platform to shine. And I have really little doubts that he will. I do think that there are weaknesses. Like I said, I think really that off the ball movement in the final third. But I think when he's in possession and build up areas, he can be a little bit more stiff than I'd like him to be in terms of his turning radius. If we can fix those body orientation and gait issues, I think we've got a brilliant player. And like, there really are very little cons. When I'm drafting up the chart, pro and con list, I'm nitpicking and I feel like I'm being a little bit of a nit doing it. But, I just think he takes himself to another level that we haven't seen. And I actually think we see a creative side to Declan that we haven't seen in terms of some of the invention. I really think there's a dribbling component here that when you talk about nutmegs and even, going around players, he's got such a brilliant close control. I wonder, for such a big personality, by the way, off the pitch, there's got to be some more on it. Like, I just think he's waiting to burst, and there's more Europa League bursting run moments than there are less of them. So
Yeah,
I'm excited for that.
I am too. And to your point, I mean, Clive Palmer of the excellent Arsenal Vision podcast, he's, you know, I recall him saying a few times that he can't wait to see Declan Rice under a proper coach, a different coach, respectfully to David Moyes. Moyes has done a great job at West Ham, and he plays his football a certain way. He has a certain job to do. What we've seen Mikel Arteta do in terms of elevating individual performances, individual games, the way he's been coaching and the impact he's had on these players, like Declan Rice coming in at 24, his ceiling is so high. And the level that he's playing now, he can get even better. I mean, you know, he could have 100 caps for England by the time he's 27, 28 at the rate that he's going. And, you know, 200 games already under his belt for West Ham, and, you know, playing in a better team with better players, being more competitive, playing at the, you know, sitting at Europe's top table in the Champions League. I'm really interested. And look, in closing, you know, we are nitpicking, but that's what you get for 105 million pounds, right? We are about to break or match the British transfer record. You know, 100 million pounds Manchester City paid for Jack Grealish. It's 100 million for Declan Rice plus 5 million in add-ons. If we get it over the line, what a signing it would be. Look, I think we've gone on for long enough. It was a slightly longer breakdown tonight, but of course, 105 million pounds and Rice, baby, it kind of deserves it. George, thank you so much for your time. Anybody who wants to follow George, he is at GeorgeV_AFC. I think there's your cue to go. Thank you to all the chats. There are 700 of you watching live right now towards the end. Thousands of you have tuned in. Do me a favor, please drop a like on the video. It helps the video get much more recognition. We've smashed 20k subscribers. We are well on our way to 50k. That's the next target. So drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and get involved in the chat. I normally respond to all the chats after the videos have gone down. Let me know what you think. Is Declan Rice the player for you? What sort of impact do you think he's going to have in this Arsenal team? And are we doing the right thing? 105 million pounds. We will be back with a late night latte, the first late night latte of the summer, in the next coming days. If you're interested in short breakdowns on Kai Havertz or Urian Timber, of course, that fee has just been agreed. Do check out the Latte Firm channel feed, and there's a couple of other amusing videos. George, thank you for your time tonight. Everybody, ladies, gents, boys and girls, go and have yourselves a lovely couple of days. It is time to stop, collaborate, and listen, because Declan Rice is about to become a gunner. Until next time, bye for now.